War thrives on order, but survives through chaos. Beneath every ration, convoy, and military plan, a hidden network traded what governments forbade. Archival records show that from Berlin to London, from Warsaw to Manila, entire economies operated in silence, supplying armies and civilians alike through corruption, desperation, and quiet consent. This is the war beneath the war. Let's uncover the 10 forgotten facts that history never told in full. 1. The black market was a civilian problem, not part of the war. Economy. Most post-war histories describe the black market as a byproduct of rationing, a symptom of civilian hardship, not an element of the war economy itself. The narrative suggests ordinary people turned to illegal trade out of necessity, while governments and militaries remained isolated from such corruption. This image of two separate worlds, a moral state and an immoral underground, has endured for decades, reinforced by official propaganda and early economic reports that sought to preserve the moral authority of wartime mobilization. Yet archival evidence and economic data show that the black market was not a mere side effect, but an integral part of the global wartime economy. Across occupied Europe, Africa, and the Pacific, black markets became alternative supply systems that both fed and drained the official war effort. In occupied France, vast networks of clandestine traders exchanged food, fuel, and industrial goods between zones, sometimes using German soldiers and administrators as middlemen. In Italy and Greece, state rationing systems collapsed entirely, forcing the Axis occupation forces themselves to rely on black market intermediaries for basic provisions. In Britain, corruption in the distribution of meat, butter, and petrol became so widespread that by 1944, black market prosecutions reached nearly 12,000 per month. Even in the United States, the Office of Price Administration reported that counterfeit ration books and stolen gasoline coupons represented one of the largest domestic law enforcement challenges of the period. These were not isolated incidents. The black market was woven into the logistical fabric of total war. Military personnel routinely engaged in illicit trade, exchanging army rations, fuel, and cigarettes for local food and services. Transportation networks used for official logistics were often diverted to move contraband. Railway workers, shipping clerks, and procurement officers all participated in a parallel economy that functioned beneath the surface of the official one. By 1943, this hidden system had become so extensive that several Allied ministries privately admitted that complete eradication was impossible without endangering civilian morale and troop supply. The war machine itself was feeding its own shadow. Recognizing the black market as a structural component of wartime logistics, not simply a civilian weakness, changes how we understand total war. It reveals that every ration, every shipment, and every factory was part of a global struggle between official control and underground necessity. 2. Neutral nations stayed out of wartime trade and illegal supply chains. The traditional view of neutrality in World War II presents countries like Switzerland, Sweden, Spain, and Portugal as politically detached observers, committed to lawful commerce and diplomatic balance. This narrative was shaped by post-war diplomacy, which sought to maintain economic relationships and avoid accusations of collaboration. In reality, neutral nations became essential arteries in the black market systems that fed both Axis and Allied economies. They were not merely passive conduits, they were active brokers. Through neutral ports and financial institutions, strategic materials, foreign currency, and industrial goods moved between warring states in violation of embargoes and blockades. Portugal's wolfram, tungsten, exports to Germany provided a vital material for armor-piercing shells, continuing until 1944 despite Allied pressure. Spain served as a covert passage for oil products, mercury, and food supplies, often re-exported under false documentation. In Switzerland, banks handled gold looted from occupied Europe, while industries quietly purchased and resold machinery components originating from both sides of the conflict. Sweden exported high-grade iron ore to Germany throughout the war, carried across the Baltic under heavy naval protection. Turkey supplied chromium and other raw materials to the Axis even as it received Allied aid. These operations were not isolated acts of opportunism, but part of an organized international economy that thrived on secrecy, barter, and profit. Intelligence reports from both sides confirmed that neutral ports such as Lisbon, Stockholm, and Istanbul became major centers of smuggling and black market exchange, where diplomats, industrialists, and spies often operated from the same hotels. The profits were immense, and the moral lines blurred. For every embargo, there was a loophole. For every regulation, a workaround. By facilitating unofficial trade, neutral states helped prolong the war by sustaining the industrial base of the belligerents who depended on them. The myth of neutrality, therefore, conceals a deeper economic truth. No nation remained untouched by the underground commerce of total war. Neutrality, in practice, was another form of participation, one measured not by armies, but by invoices, shipments, and bank transfers moving under cover of legitimacy. 3. Axis resource shortages were caused only by Allied blockades and bombing. Standard military histories emphasize the external pressures on Axis supply: naval blockades, bombing of industrial centers, and loss of occupied territories. These explanations are accurate but incomplete. The real economic erosion of the Axis war effort began from within through inefficiency, corruption, and black market diversion. By 1943, Germany's centralized command economy had become riddled with hidden leaks. Raw materials allocated for weapons production were siphoned off to private traders, occupied territory administrators, and even local military commands operating unofficial industries. In occupied France and Belgium, factory managers overstated material needs to receive additional quotas, which they then sold on the black market at massive profit. Wehrmacht officers frequently diverted requisitioned food and fuel for personal or unit use, establishing underground exchanges with local populations. In the Balkans, military police uncovered entire smuggling rings moving textiles, pharmaceuticals, and gasoline under falsified documents bearing army seals. The same phenomenon occurred in the Japanese Empire, where the official economy in occupied China and Southeast Asia disintegrated into barter, theft, and unregulated trade. Black market inflation reached catastrophic levels, undermining morale and production alike. German attempts to stabilize prices and enforce rationing failed because the administrative machinery was itself compromised. Local officials enriched themselves, collaborators hoarded supplies, and the Gestapo focused more on political policing than economic crime. The cumulative effect was devastating. War production fell not only because of Allied attacks, but because essential inputs simply vanished before reaching factories. Economists studying post-war records found that by 1944, as much as 1/5 of German steel and fuel allocations had disappeared into the informal economy. Japan faced similar losses as corrupt officers sold military rations and uniforms on the black market to feed starving civilians or line their own pockets. What appeared as military collapse was in part a systemic economic breakdown. The myth that Allied power alone starved the Axis ignores how deeply internal corruption and illicit trade eroded the foundations of total war. 4. Forced labor and slave industry operated independently from the black market. Popular imagery often separates the industrialized slavery of the Nazi system from the chaos of the black market. In textbooks and documentaries, forced labor is portrayed as a controlled mechanism of production, strictly organized under the German War Ministry and SS, with no connection to the informal economy. This separation is misleading. The same logistical systems that moved millions of foreign and concentration camp laborers across Europe also facilitated the transport of stolen goods, diverted materials, and contraband. In practice, the two systems overlapped continuously. By 1944, over 12 million forced laborers worked within the Reich, and countless others in occupied territories. Many of their workplaces, mines, refineries, vehicle plants, and construction sites, operated under dual accounting, reporting official quotas while selling excess output unofficially. Camp administrators and factory directors routinely bartered supplies intended for forced labor maintenance on the black market, exchanging food, clothing, and medicine for scarce raw materials. In Poland and the Soviet territories, German occupation authorities established procurement markets, where requisitioned goods were sold privately before reaching military stockpiles. The profits enriched both local collaborators and German officials. Even within concentration camps, stolen prisoner possessions re-entered circulation through informal trade among guards and civilians. Allied investigators after the war uncovered evidence of entire transport networks devoted to smuggling goods produced by slave labor into civilian markets, bypassing official channels. The forced labor economy, meant to serve the war machine, became one of its most corrupt sectors. The black market absorbed its output, fueled its continuation, and distorted its efficiency. Understanding this linkage reveals how deeply exploitation and profit were intertwined. The myth of a purely controlled slave industry obscures the reality that coercion and corruption coexisted, feeding off each other in a closed cycle of supply, demand, and human suffering that reached from occupied villages to Berlin boardrooms. 5. Allied economies were immune to black market influence. The enduring belief that the Allies maintained clean, disciplined wartime economies ignores a vast record of illicit trade, profiteering, and corruption within their own systems. Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union all faced black market pressures that mirrored, on a smaller scale, those of occupied Europe. In Britain, rationing created a network of illegal traders dealing in meat, fuel, and textiles, supported by bribery among local inspectors. Police records show that by the end of 1944, more than 200,000 individuals had been prosecuted for ration violations. In the Soviet Union, entire supply depots were drained by theft and diversion, leading the government to establish special tribunals for war profiteering. In the United States, rationing introduced in 1942, covering gasoline, sugar, rubber, and meat, rapidly gave rise to counterfeit coupons and organized resale operations. Soldiers stationed overseas often participated in illicit trade themselves, exchanging army rations, fuel, or cigarettes for local goods and currency. In Italy after 1943, Allied occupation forces confronted the same moral dilemmas as their Axis predecessors. Stolen fuel, uniforms, and food appeared in markets hours after arriving at depots. Investigations revealed that some military personnel and civilian contractors collaborated with local smugglers to divert supplies from relief shipments. The American home front faced its own version of this hidden economy. The war's massive industrial mobilization attracted profiteers who falsified production reports, overcharged for contracts, or diverted materials from government factories. The moral boundary between patriotism and profit blurred. Officials recognized that complete control was impossible without crippling production or morale. Consequently, governments tolerated minor black market activity as a safety valve, provided it did not threaten overall logistics. The result was a paradox. The same system that waged war against tyranny also depended, in part, on its own underground commerce to function. Recognizing this does not diminish the Allied achievement, but restores realism to the narrative. Total war, by its nature, produced total economies. And wherever rationing, scarcity, and opportunity converged, the black market followed. The clean lines of propaganda fade when viewed through the ledger of hidden trade, revealing a world where even victory depended on supply chains that operated both in light and in shadow. 6. The occupied territories functioned entirely under military control, not economic anarchy. The image of occupied Europe during the war is one of rigid authority. Soldiers on every street, curfews, ration cards, and meticulous German administration. Popular depictions suggest that every resource, factory, and railway was under strict supervision, feeding directly into the war machine with bureaucratic precision. The notion of total control was itself a weapon of propaganda, designed to project an image of efficiency and inevitability. But economic records from the occupied territories tell a different story. Beneath the image of control lay disorder, theft, and barter that quietly undermined the Reich's system. German economic administrators often lacked both manpower and accurate data. In France, Belgium, and the Netherlands, military and civilian authorities competed for resources, issuing conflicting orders that traders learned to exploit. Local mayors, gendarmeries, and industrialists learned that paper orders from Berlin could be delayed or evaded through bribes or falsified ledgers. As shortages deepened, German officers themselves entered the black market, purchasing food and consumer goods that their ration cards could no longer provide. Reports from 1942 to 1944 describe entire army supply convoys diverted to illegal buyers before reaching frontline units. In Poland and Ukraine, local collaborators sold grain and meat to German depots for inflated prices, while smuggling equal quantities into secret markets. Currency instability amplified this chaos. The Reichsmark, issued in vast quantities to occupied populations, lost credibility, driving civilians toward barter or foreign currency, especially US dollars and Swiss francs. By late 1943, the occupied economies operated through a mix of official rationing and underground trade that effectively functioned as a second, parallel economy. Even the SS profited, establishing its own networks of confiscated property resale. For German commanders, these leaks were tolerated as long as the flow of materials to the Reich continued. The illusion of order was preserved in reports, not in reality. The occupied zones were not models of control, but landscapes of improvisation, where power and profit constantly traded places. The myth of discipline concealed an economy that, in practice, ran on theft, bribery, and quiet complicity. 7. The Soviet war economy was entirely centralized and immune to illicit trade. Soviet wartime propaganda portrayed the Red Army's rear as a perfectly organized command economy. Central planning, rationing, and collective discipline were said to sustain victory through sacrifice and unity. Western observers after 1945 often accepted this image, describing the Soviet system as an iron structure immune to the moral erosion that afflicted occupied Europe. But declassified Soviet records and memoirs of wartime administrators reveal an economy held together as much by improvisation and informal exchange as by central control. The evacuation of industry eastward between 1941 and 1942 dislocated millions of workers, leaving supply networks in disarray. Official quotas were issued from Moscow, but transport bottlenecks, corruption, and sheer survival needs forced local managers to barter directly for materials, food, and labor. Factory directors in the Urals traded machinery parts for grain. Railway officials sold coal or fuel to secure spare parts. Local military commissars authorized unofficial exchanges to meet production targets. The result was an enormous, unofficial internal market operating under the surface of Soviet regulation. NKVD reports from 1943 noted widespread theft from military depots and unregistered transactions between factories. Black markets thrived in cities such as Kuybyshev and Sverdlovsk, where military rations were resold to civilians at 10 times official prices. Even at the front, soldiers bartered boots, cigarettes, and watches with civilians for food. The Soviet system tolerated these practices to a surprising degree. Enforcement fluctuated depending on priorities. Production came first, legality second. As long as quotas were met, violations were ignored. The persistence of informal trade actually stabilized morale by allowing millions to survive chronic shortages. It blurred the line between official and unofficial economies, just as in the West. The myth of a perfectly planned Soviet economy conceals the fact that survival itself depended on negotiation, barter, and silent tolerance of illegality. The machinery of the Red Army was fed not only by state planning, but also by countless local trades conducted beyond the reach of any plan. 8. Wartime finance was transparent and accountable to public oversight. One of the most enduring myths of the Allied home front is that war finance, bonds, taxes, and industrial contracts, operated under patriotic transparency. Posters urged citizens to buy war bonds, implying that every dollar directly supported soldiers overseas. The public narrative equated financial contribution with moral virtue. Yet wartime fiscal archives show that the scale of economic mobilization created opportunities for concealment and profit rarely seen before or since. In the United States, the vast procurement apparatus of the War Production Board managed millions of contracts worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Oversight lagged behind expansion. By 1943, internal audits documented widespread overbilling, ghost employees, and double invoicing. Large corporations, including major steel and aircraft firms, quietly negotiated cost-plus contracts that guaranteed profit regardless of performance. Meanwhile, smaller contractors sold surplus material or defective goods into private markets. War bond drives covered the gap by appealing to patriotism rather than accountability, diverting attention from the opaque financial reality beneath. Britain faced similar issues. Emergency powers allowed ministries to bypass normal bidding, leading to unrecorded subcontracting and inflated pricing. In the Soviet Union, economic secrecy was absolute. State banks manipulated currency values to hide deficits caused by industrial losses and occupation. Even Axis economies mirrored this pattern. In Nazi Germany, capital flight and hidden accounts proliferated as companies prepared for defeat, moving assets through Swiss intermediaries. The result across all major powers was an unrecorded financial underworld that paralleled the physical black markets of goods. It thrived in shadows cast by urgency and fear, with governments unwilling to expose corruption that could undermine morale. Post-war investigations exposed fragments of this concealed economy, but most documentation remained classified for decades. The belief in transparent wartime finance, therefore, masks a truth both larger and more mundane. Total war required total secrecy, and within secrecy, profit multiplied unchecked. 9. Post-war reconstruction erased the black market legacy. It is often assumed that the black markets of wartime Europe disappeared with peace, replaced by legal reconstruction and economic recovery. The visual contrast is persuasive. Soldiers replaced by engineers, ration books by paychecks, rubble by rebuilding. But the transition from war to peace did not extinguish the underground networks that had flourished during occupation and rationing. Instead, they adapted. In the ruins of Berlin, Warsaw, and Naples, the same traders who once sold smuggled cigarettes or food now handled industrial scrap, surplus equipment, and foreign currency. Allied occupation authorities in Germany reported that by 1946, black market trade exceeded legal commerce in many zones. Cigarettes became a universal medium of exchange. Entire warehouses of U.S. Army supplies vanished from depots only to reappear in civilian markets. In Eastern Europe, reconstruction under Soviet supervision also relied on informal trade. Factories lacking parts or fuel used barter to continue operations, often paying workers in goods rather than currency. In Britain, rationing persisted until 1954, sustaining domestic black markets for meat, alcohol, and clothing long after the war's end. The persistence of these networks reveals their structural function. They were not aberrations of wartime chaos, but essential mechanisms of adaptation. Former soldiers, displaced persons, and refugees often survived by trading illegally across borders drawn by the victors. Even within the new Marshall Plan economies, corruption scandals surfaced as aid supplies and funds were diverted into hidden markets. The legacy of wartime smuggling and profiteering thus survived in the very institutions that rebuilt Europe. Peace did not erase the habits of scarcity, it merely renamed them. The myth of clean reconstruction overlooks this continuity, suggesting a moral restoration that economic reality did not support. In truth, the black market was the bridge between destruction and recovery, an economy of necessity that refused to die when the guns fell silent. 10. The black market was a marginal footnote in the history of World War II. In the grand narratives of the Second World War, the battles, the generals, the politics, the black market appears, if at all, as an incidental backdrop. It is treated as an inevitable but minor outcome of scarcity, not as a historical force. Yet a review of wartime logistics and post-war archives demonstrates that the black market was one of the hidden engines of the global conflict. It shaped the distribution of food, fuel, and industrial materials across all major powers. It sustained armies, fed civilians, and enriched those who learned to navigate its rules. Every major campaign, from North Africa to the Eastern Front, depended in part on unofficial exchanges between soldiers and local populations. Smuggling routes determined availability of spare parts, medical supplies, and fuel in ways official records rarely capture. Governments fought 2 wars simultaneously, one against enemy armies, another against economic entropy within their own systems. The black market was not peripheral to this struggle, it was its mirror. It revealed the limits of control in societies stretched to the brink of endurance. When historians examine wartime production figures that fail to match consumption data, the missing quantities often trace back to illegal diversion. When morale held despite famine, it was often because underground trade allowed survival where official channels failed. The myth of marginality endures because it preserves the comforting illusion that war remained a matter of strategy and heroism rather than economics and survival. To acknowledge the black market's centrality is to recognize that victory and defeat were not only decided in factories or on battlefields, but also in basements, ports, and alleyways, where unseen hands kept the machinery of war moving. It is there, in the shadows of necessity, that the true economy of the Second World War reveals, itself a vast network of improvised exchange that shaped history more deeply than any headline or proclamation ever admitted. History rarely tells everything, but what it leaves behind still defines us. The black markets of war remind us that even in great causes, survival rewrites the rules of morality and order. In studying what nations hid, we see what they valued most. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe and help preserve the record of what truly happened.